non-reductive, non-repetition, and exclusion breaks down into the opposite, repetitive reduction. And all the other combinations of those two concepts aren't intelligible, but we don't need to get into those. So exclusion is not being excluded. It just doesn't progress into anything, whereas non-exclusion or non-reductive, non-repetition does turn into something. It turns into existence, or what existence is first. What I sort of mean by that is if you look at the leaves of any tree or plant, you'll see that the intervals are intervals of presence and absence, and the intervals change gradually, so no intervals are left out. You wouldn't expect like intervals being left out. If you looked at a fern, it's all like smooth change, and that's the theme of existence, is like all change is gradual, all gradients are gradual, even the energy levels of atoms are gradual. You don't have like jumps. That is, if like the first energy level of an atom has one orbital, then the second one's going to have two orbitals. It's not going to jump and have three orbitals. It's not going to skip. So that's the non-reductive part. But it's also not going to be the same. It's not going to, the first one's not going to have one orbital, and the second one's not going to have one orbital. So it's not going to be repetitive. But that's not, it's not excluding repetition. It just uses it in a different way that I'll get to in another podcast. So what else do I want to talk about? Humans are crazy, mutually antagonistic. They don't understand that our personalities are non-reductive and non-repetitive as well. There's 10 parts of our mind. So when I say the Cammie spectrum, dispositional personality, I'm talking about 10 different, what I call intervals. Let's see. Let's try to go through these intervals, say crudely, because I can really get into it. There's the one where you're determining what to do. I have like 12 Twitter accounts, and 10 of them are dedicated to like each of these intervals, and one's called Cammie, and that's the one that figures out what to do. And there's one that evaluates goals or novel improvements, and that's the Buckminster Cammie. And then there's the one that deals with somatosensory perception, and that's Wilbur Cammie. And then there's the one that deals with right brain vision and sound, and that's Thunder Cammie. And then there's left brain vision and sound, that's Uber Cammie. And then there is Delusa Cammie, and that has to do with normalization. Anything to do with social norms or breaking social norms, or humor associated with social norms, anger associated with breaking social norms. Then there's the familiarization interval, and that is Ever Cammie. That has to do with any kind of familiarized authority, the disposition to familiarity. We're attracted to familiarity. Let's see, what else? Witten Cammie. These are all hybridizations of different philosophers and other things. Witten Cammie has to do with induction, or inducing patterns, and what you expect. This is hard. I don't even know how many I went through. Lindsay Cammie. that has to do with action. I could get into that, but I'm blanking on a bunch. I just can't remember them off the top of my head. So maybe I should just talk about mutual novelty again. This all started like 11 years ago when I started noticing with Thunder Cammie, because it has to do with being able to imagine things in your head, that there's intervals or scales to existence, and they came in a pattern. You're broken into, like, first of all, pairs, say like abdomen, thorax, and head, and it's like a combination of units, and then a unit, and then there's states of that unit, and then that's paired with another set of three, organ system, organ, and tissue, and that's total combinations, and then units. And so that's a pair, and that makes a scale, and that's grouped into 3 scales. So there's like 4 and 2. So the scale down has 2 pairs of 3. So that's the cell, and you have like the outer cell, the nucleus, and the nucleolus, which is this huge molecule where it makes all the ribosomes, or ribosomal enzymes, which are basically the main thing that clamps down on the DNA when it's transcribing. I believe. I might be mistaken about that. That's actually, okay. Then there's another one down below that, and then another one, and another one. But I got off track. I really want to talk about the daily routine of the cell. Now, scientists tend to see events in isolation, and so they can describe the daily routine of the cell in extraordinary detail, and I can't even replicate what they're saying, and they sound really smart. But the problem is that they can't see the cumulatively compounded improbability of all these events happening in the cell. And because they don't have a physics background, and they don't see that the primary explanation for that is supposed to be the electric law, which is essentially just opposite charges always attract and like charges always repel. We're glossing over a few details, like obviously gravitation, magnetism, and dispersion of energy, the symmetrical dispersion of energy, and things like that. There's a few little details, but primarily that's supposed to be the explanation. And it's not even an explanation, it's just an observation of a pattern. Nobody even knows why there's an electric law. You can say there's photons exchanging, but then you run into that Zeno's paradox again. And the atoms aren't even made up of anything in the first place. So even to transcribe just one gene would take, it's like billions of times more elaborate than what you might think. Like the daily routine of the cell is superficially as complex as all the customer movements happening in like a large supermarket during a day, and having everything go right. Like, so imagine if you put like magnets on everything in the store, like in all these dummies, and then you could turn the magnets on or off, and all they could do is attract or repel in a rigid way. The problem is rigidity. And if you turned them on, it'd be easy to see that everything would just crash into each other. Nothing would be functional. And so I'm saying that in order to get the daily routine of the cell to work, you need a disposition to functionality. And that disposition to functionality is part of a bunch of dispositions. And it's all explained by mutual novelty. Like, it's just filling out the spectrum of possible dispositions. Like when I start talking about the mind,